So let's bring in Ian O'Connor right now. We'll talk to him about Tiger as well. Ian, what do you make of the Phil Jackson reach out? I don't think there's any chance he coaches the Knicks, and I don't think that Jim Dolan wants him to coach the Knicks.
I agree on both counts. And I also agree with you a couple years ago in ripping the Knicks for not even reaching out to Phil Jackson at the time when they needed a head coach. And, of course, they went with Mike Woodson. And how has that worked out? But listen, I think Jackson is interested in being a front office guy. But if he ever took a job in the Knicks front office, I can tell you one thing. He is not reporting to Steve Mills, okay? He is going to report to one person, and that would be Jim Dolan, and that's it. So to have Mills recruit Phil Jackson is a bit of a joke. Jim Dolan has to do that recruitment because he's the only person in that organization that Phil would answer to, and frankly, I don't think he has any eagerness to answer to anyone at Madison Square Garden right now, including Jim Dolan.
Yeah, that's why I don't buy the story. I buy the report from Stephen A. Smith, but I doubt how serious they were in this. I think they wanted to get it out there that they reached out to Phil Jackson to dispel the myth that no big name can come here and work with Dolan, and that they want to be able to get the fans excited about something. It's ironic that this creeps up after, apparently it had happened 2 weeks ago after they've dropped 7 of 8 and now may not have a chance to make the playoffs. So I believe Stephen A. Smith's story. I just don't believe that they were as serious as they're making it out to be, that they really reached out to Phil Jackson.
And it's interesting, after Chris Broussard's report on Noah recruiting Melo to Chicago, a day later, all of a sudden you have Stephen A.'s report that the Knicks are after Phil Jackson. So that was interesting timing. And listen, I'm not going to kill the Knicks for reaching out to Phil Jackson because I killed them for not reaching out to him a couple of years ago. I think you have to take a stab at it just in case. He is the greatest coach, arguably, in the history of professional basketball and maybe in all of American sports. So you have to take a shot. But there's no way he's taking over this roster. Look at his history. I don't blame him. I wouldn't either. And, again, if he's going to be an executive for the Knicks, he is going to be above Steve Mills, at least in a basketball context. He's not answering to Steve Mills on that front. So I just don't see it happening.
Now, in the column that you wrote, Ian, and I when we were introducing you, I gave you the names Thibodeau, Van Gundy. I gave the fans the name. You know what they are. You wrote it. Mark Jackson, John Calipari, and Billy Donovan. Mm-hmm. Those are all high-profile coaches that could probably get a job anywhere, anytime they want. And I've said this for the last month as well. What coach who's desired and isn't just looking for a job is going to put up with what they make you put up with at the Garden?
Well, the one guy in that grouping that, and talking to some people around the league who are close to those 5 candidates and have done business with the Garden and the Knicks over the years, the one guy who might is John Calipari, simply because he wants to make good on his failure in New Jersey with the Nets and get back to the NBA. He's already won his national title in college. He was unhappy with that Kentucky team last year. He appears to be unhappy with that Kentucky team this year. I do think, and he's making $5.2 million in Lexington, I think he would, if he could get $7.5, $8 million and become the highest paid coach in the NBA, I think he might accept the challenge of dealing with Dolan and the dysfunction in that building. But the other guys, Thibodeau, Mark Jackson is interesting. If Mark Jackson gets fired, and I find it hard to believe that he would, but an executive told me, he heard it directly from Golden State management, that they're not thrilled with Jackson right now. So he's got a year left on his contract. They picked up his option through next season. If they fire him, I think he could be a major player. He'd be a popular pick. Maybe Mark Jackson, being a New Yorker's New Yorker, might say to himself, let me get the job. Let me be the head coach of the Knicks. It's a dream job for me, growing up in Queens, coming out of St. John's, playing for the Knicks and Rick Pitino and everything else, and I'll change Jim Dolan. I'll change his ways.
But they skipped over him once before.
They did. But, he's had some success in Golden State. He won. Listen, the Warriors have won 2 playoff series since 1991, and Mark Jackson has won one of them. So that's why I find it hard to believe that they would fire him. To me, the Knicks would probably prefer Tom Thibodeau, but he's got 3 years left on his deal. The Bulls are not just going to let him walk to New York without compensation. And by the way, somebody close to Thibodeau told me that he loves New York. Even though he's more of a New England guy, that's the one job in the league that he would really want above all other jobs, and that he would crawl to New York if he had the opportunity to become the head coach of the Knicks. I just don't think it's going to happen. The Knicks have no assets to give Chicago if the Bulls demand compensation, and that's where Mark Jackson could really become a major factor when they replace Woodson.
I'll tell you what, though, Ian, of the 5 guys on that list, the guy that I think has the best chance of ending up with a job, and I think really wants it, I'm just trying to read the tea leaves, is Jeff Van Gundy.
Well, I'll say this. He'd be my pick, and that was in my column as well, as you know, Michael. I think Van Gundy would listen. I think he does want one more crack at coaching. before,
and I don't think he likes the way he left here. He quit.
Right, and he told you that, you guys, right?
Yeah.
He basically apologized for that, and rightfully so. But I don't think he would take it unless he had a one-on-one meeting with Jim Dolan, and this is possible. He may have that meeting at some point, and Jim Dolan says to him, Jeff, we'll run it your way because, listen, there was no media policy when Jeff Van Gundy was the head coach, and that was the last time they had a head coach who did some consistent winning for them in the playoffs. And so Jeff could say to him, listen, Jim, let's just go back to the way it was. We won then. We weren't worrying about all these other things that have absolutely nothing to do with winning. And if you allow me to run the operation that way as your head coach, I'll take the job.
Now, I was going to ask you about Woods, but I got to jump in about Thibodeau. He wants the job. Why? I mean, he's got a great situation in Chicago.
Great city.
The team's going to the playoffs despite losing their best player for the second consecutive year. They may have him healthy next year. To go to the dysfunction in New York, as much as you'd love that second opportunity, I just can't see why that would be so